There's a moment in Moses' life almost no one talks about. A moment so quiet in Scripture you could read past it without ever realizing how close everything came to ending before it even began. Picture this: a single night on the road back to Egypt. No crowds, no miracles, no plagues, just a man, a family, and a journey through unfamiliar land, and something waiting for him in the darkness. It was here, away from the noise of history, that Moses hesitated. Not with words, not with arguments, but with a silence heavy enough to tilt the future. Because deep inside him was a question he had avoided for years, a question that rose up again as the desert winds pressed against him. What if he wasn't meant to return? What if the call he heard at the burning bush had been meant for someone stronger, someone braver? What if the guilt he carried from his past was right? What if he was the wrong man for this? Most people remember Moses standing before Pharaoh, but almost no one remembers the night God confronted him before he ever reached Egypt. A night when the road itself seemed to hold its breath, and the mission that would reshape nations hung by a thread. And in that hidden stretch of wilderness, something happened that Scripture records in a single line, a moment so severe, so unexpected, that it forces us to rethink everything we thought we knew about this man. Because before Moses could lead anyone, he first had to survive this night. To understand that night, you have to go back to the world Moses had been living in, not the world of Pharaoh's courts, where he once walked with confidence he no longer recognized, but the world of Midian, quiet, distant, almost forgotten by history. It had been many years since Moses fled Egypt. The dust of that land still lived somewhere in his memory, but his life now unfolded in a place where nothing reminded him of who he once was. Days were marked by the same slow patterns: the bleating of sheep, the crackle of dry earth beneath sandals, the steady hum of desert wind moving across empty stretches of land. This was not the life of a prince. This was not the life of a leader. This was the life of a man who had stepped away from everything and allowed time to wrap him in silence. He had built routines, simple ones that asked nothing from him except patience. But beneath the calm, a restless weight remained. The memory of Egypt, the memory of a single moment of anger that changed everything, the memory of the man he thought he was supposed to become, all of it still followed him, even here. The desert has a way of exposing thoughts a person tries to outrun. And for Moses, the wilderness had become both refuge and mirror. Each quiet morning reminded him that he was living far from the world where his story began. Each long night reminded him that part of him still wondered what he could have been if he hadn't run. He carried exile like a cloak, heavy enough to shape his posture, familiar enough that he no longer questioned it. To everyone around him, he looked settled. A husband, a father, a shepherd. But within him, questions he never voiced continued to press against his heart. Who was he now? An Egyptian by upbringing? A Hebrew by birth? A man without a country? Or someone God still intended to use, despite everything? These were the questions he didn't share with anyone. They lived in the moments between footsteps, in the way he sometimes stared across the horizon as though expecting something to appear, in the way he hesitated before answering simple questions about his past. Then came the day that interrupted his routine, the day he saw something that did not fit into the quiet world he had built. A flame that stood still. A bush that burned without turning to ash. A voice that spoke his name with a clarity he had not felt in decades. The call was unmistakable. The message was overwhelming. The mission, far beyond anything Moses believed he had the strength to carry out. And this is where the deeper conflict began. Not with Pharaoh, not with Israel, but within Moses himself. He had spent years learning how to be small, unnoticed, distant. And now he was being asked to return to the land he once fled, to stand before the most powerful ruler of the age, and to speak with authority he did not believe he possessed. This is what Moses carried with him on the road back to Egypt. The sand of Midian still clinging to his clothes, the uncertainty still heavy in his chest, the memories of a life divided in two. The desert wind pressed against him with every step. The silence around him felt different now. No longer comforting, but expectant, as though the land itself recognized what he was walking toward. Every mile brought him closer to a past he had avoided and a future he didn't know how to face. And somewhere along that lonely path, in the space between one campfire and the next, the moment came. A moment no one warned him about. A moment that nearly ended the journey before it began. A moment where the road, the night, and the unseen weight of his calling all converged, and everything he thought he knew about himself would be tested. Before that mysterious night on the road, before the confrontation no one talks about, there was a different moment. One that began quietly, without any sign that history was about to shift. It was late afternoon in Midian. The sun hung low, stretching long shadows across the rocky ground. Moses moved with practiced ease among the sheep, guiding them across familiar paths he had walked countless times. There was nothing unusual about the day. No omen in the sky. No warning that the ordinary routine he depended on was about to break wide open. His staff tapped lightly against the earth. Dust lifted with every step. The sheep wandered lazily, grazing on whatever they could find in the thinning patches of grass. It was the kind of monotony Moses had grown used to, a rhythm so constant it nearly erased the memory of who he once was. But even in that stillness, there was always an unspoken tension inside him. He knew he was living between two identities, one he had abandoned, and one he never fully understood. Every time he lifted his eyes toward the distant horizon, a part of him wondered about Egypt, about the palace he once called home, about the people he once tried to defend, about the choice that sent him running into these wild lands. The desert had faded some memories, but not all. Some stayed sharp, some stayed painful. He watched the sheep drift, their shapes blurring in the orange glow of sunset. It felt like watching time itself pass, slow, steady, demanding nothing. And yet, beneath that quiet surface, the weight in his chest never left. The weight of unfinished purpose. The weight of questions he never answered. As the light dimmed, the air grew cooler, and the landscape shifted into deeper shade. Moses guided the flock toward the far side of the wilderness, where the terrain rose gently. It was a place he had been many times, a place he believed he understood. Then something caught his eye. At first, it was just a glow, soft, distant, flickering in a way that didn't belong to sunset or campfire. He slowed his steps. The sheep continued forward, but Moses stood still, narrowing his eyes as the glow sharpened into the shape of a flame. It was fire, but it wasn't acting like fire. He stepped closer, cautious, each footfall echoing louder in his ears than it should have. His breath tightened. The closer he moved, the stranger the scene became. The flames climbed upward, steady, bright, yet nothing around them seemed to burn. No crackling branches, no collapsing bark, no rising smoke. A bush stood rooted, engulfed by fire that refused to consume it. Moses' heartbeat quickened. His hand tightened around his staff. Every instinct told him to step back, yet something deeper pulled him forward. He had lived many years in the wilderness, and nothing in his experience could explain what he was seeing. He moved slowly, feeling the tension in his body rise with each cautious step. His sandals scraped against stone. The wind grew still. Even the sheep seemed uneasy, shifting in the distance. And then, without warning, a voice broke through the silence. A voice that knew him. A voice that called him by name. Moses! Moses! He froze, every muscle locked. Every memory, every fear, every hidden part of him rose to the surface at once. This was no echo of his thoughts, no desert illusion. This was direct, personal, unmistakable. He answered in a whisper shaped by awe and uncertainty. And in that instant, he felt something he had not felt in years, the weight of being seen. But with that recognition came a flood of doubts. Who am I to return? How can I stand before Pharaoh? What if I fail again? The past he tried to bury came rushing back. The mistake that forced him to flee, the fear that had shaped his exile, the unspoken belief that his story had ended long ago. And yet, the voice from the flame continued. The fire did not spread. The bush did not bend. The moment held still, as if the entire desert was waiting for Moses to respond. The call that followed was clear. There was no confusion in the message, no ambiguity in the task. Moses was told to return to Egypt, to confront the ruler he once fled from, to speak on behalf of a people who barely remembered him, to stand in a place he no longer felt worthy to stand. The weight of it pressed down on him, and Moses did what many would do. He resisted. He didn't resist with defiance. He resisted with honesty. Words tumbled out of him, shaped by fear, shaped by years of silence, shaped by wounds he never healed. His first concern was simple. Who am I to do this? He no longer saw himself as a man with influence. He saw a shepherd, a wanderer, someone whose story had shifted into the margins. Then came the next concern. What if they do not believe me? He remembered how quickly rejection can come. He remembered how quickly trust can crumble. He remembered the failure that forced him to flee decades ago. More questions followed, each one revealing another layer of uncertainty. What should I say? What if my words carry no weight? What if my weakness exposes me? What if my past returns to crush me? His voice trembled, not from disrespect, but from a heart that felt unprepared for anything this large. Fear of Pharaoh, fear of his own limitations, fear of stepping back into the world he had abandoned. He even pointed out the flaw he believed disqualified him completely. A flaw in his speech, one he felt would ruin everything. The flame did not dim. The voice did not change. The call did not shift to someone else. Instead, the reply was gentle, firm, and unmistakably purposeful. It was as though Moses' excuses were being met with the truth he had forgotten. That God chooses people who know their limitations. That calling rarely fits into comfort. That hesitation can become strength when yielded. That identity is not built on past failures, but on the one who speaks into the uncertainty. The conversation stretched on, moving through layers of doubt Moses had carried for years. It was not a quick moment. It was a slow unveiling of a man who believed he had nothing left to give, and a God who saw something in him he could not yet see in himself. By the time the conversation ended, Moses stood at a crossroads between the life he had learned to accept and the life he never imagined he would be asked to step into. And the desert around him, once familiar and quiet, now felt charged with purpose. Because this was no longer about tending sheep. This was no longer about survival. This was the beginning of a journey that would challenge every fear he carried and confront every shadow he tried to outrun. A journey that would test him long before it tested Egypt. As Moses began the journey back toward Egypt, the weight of his calling settled heavily on him. He did not travel alone anymore. Zipporah walked beside him. Their children rode with them. The air shifted as they left the quiet of Midian behind, entering unfamiliar paths that stretched toward a land Moses hadn't seen in decades. The journey itself felt uncertain. The sound of the livestock, the uneven rhythm of footsteps, the silence that grew deeper the farther they traveled. Moses carried the instructions from the burning bush, but something in him remained unsettled. He had agreed to the mission, yet traces of hesitation still clung to him, like dust that refused to fall away. As night approached, they stopped at a lodging place along the road. The sky darkened slowly, spreading shadows across the ground. The air cooled. Zipporah settled the children. Moses stepped aside to gather his thoughts, aware of a heaviness he could not explain. And then, without warning, the moment came. Scripture records it in only a few words, so brief many never notice it. But this night stands as one of the most mysterious turning points in Moses' entire journey. The Lord met him and sought to put him to death. Exodus 4 verse 24. The words are stark, offering no introduction, no explanation, no detailed account of what Moses saw or felt. Yet something unmistakably serious unfolded in that small, dim place. A confrontation that struck at the very core of Moses' identity. To understand why, you have to look deeper, beyond the moment, into the meaning behind it. Circumcision was not just a ritual. It was the sign of covenant identity. a mark given to Abraham's descendants as a declaration of belonging, obedience, and alignment with God's promise. Moses was returning to lead an entire nation into covenant faithfulness. Yet his own household carried a missing sign. One of his sons had not been circumcised. This was not a small oversight. It represented something deeper, a gap between Moses' calling and Moses' preparation. He was about to stand before Pharaoh, speak with authority, and guide a people into obedience. But in his own life, this foundational instruction remained unfinished. The tension of that failure reached its breaking point on this quiet night. The encounter was so severe that Zipporah, not Moses, acted first. She recognized the meaning before he did. She understood that this was not a punishment, but a correction, one that could not wait, not even for another hour on the road. With urgency and clarity, she carried out the act that Moses had delayed. Her intervention saved his life. Her obedience sealed the covenant mark over their household. And her role in that moment revealed a depth often overlooked, that God sometimes uses those beside us to strengthen the places where we hesitate. The incident lasted only a moment, but its impact reached far beyond the campsite. This night revealed a truth that would shape Moses for the rest of his journey. He could not lead others into commitment while leaving part of his own calling incomplete. He could not stand before Pharaoh while ignoring the symbol of the promise he represented. He could not guide a nation into faithfulness while carrying a neglected step behind him. The mystery of this night is not in its severity, but in the clarity it brought. Before Moses confronted Egypt, he had to confront himself. Before he carried God's message, he had to carry God's covenant. Before he stood as a leader, he had to stand as a man whose household reflected the calling placed upon him. This was the moment where the journey shifted, quietly, unexpectedly, but decisively. A moment many overlook. A moment that reveals far more about Moses than the plagues or the miracles ever could. A moment that tested his identity before testing his courage. And once it passed, his steps the next morning carried a different weight. He was no longer just a messenger. He was a man who had faced a hidden standard and survived it. Moses' struggle on that journey speaks to something many people still feel today. There are moments when the path ahead seems larger than anything we've prepared for. Moments when calling feels distant, when purpose feels uncertain, when responsibility seems too heavy for the strength we believe we have. Moses knew that feeling well. He knew what it meant to be chosen for something he never saw himself capable of. He knew what it meant to carry old wounds, old failures, and old fears into a new chapter he wasn't sure he could handle. There are people who feel the same, standing on the edge of a task they never asked for, wondering if they're truly the right one for it. Some are held back by fear of failure, some by memories they wish they could erase, some by doubts that whisper they're not enough, some by responsibilities that seem too overwhelming to face. Moses walked through all of these. He knew the weight of stepping into a role he didn't feel ready for. He knew the pressure of leading a family while carrying spiritual responsibility. He knew the discomfort of being called to something that demanded more than he expected. And he also knew the quiet, hidden lessons that come from long seasons of ordinary life. Sometimes the years that feel forgotten are actually shaping the character we will need later. Sometimes the quiet seasons are the ones that build the strength we'll rely on when the journey changes. Sometimes the moments that feel like delays are the very moments God is using to prepare us for what's coming. And then there are nights, like the one Moses faced, where everything feels like it shifts at once. Nights where God brings to the surface what we've left unfinished. Nights where we realize that stepping forward requires dealing with what we ignored. Nights where purpose demands honesty. These moments aren't comfortable. They aren't easy, but they move us toward the version of ourselves we were meant to become. Moses stepped into his calling with fear still present, questions still alive, and memories still haunting him. But he stepped anyway, because calling is not about perfection. It is about willingness. And in this way, his journey mirrors the journey many still face. The struggle to trust, the hesitancy before obedience, the tension between responsibility and self-doubt, the challenge of becoming who we were meant to be. His story shows that God meets people in the middle of uncertainty, not after they feel strong, but while they still feel unsure. There comes a point in Moses' journey where the desert no longer shields him from what he left behind. 40 years had passed since he last saw the sands of Egypt, yet the memory of that land clung to him as he walked with purpose for the first time in decades. The sky above him stretched wide and calm, carrying the same wind that once moved through Pharaoh's courts. But Moses was no longer the young man who fled. His hands were hardened by shepherd work, his hair carried the color of passing seasons, and his heart held an awareness he could never have gained inside a palace. As he approached the borderlands, each step felt weighted. The terrain shifted, and with it, something in his spirit. He could almost sense history catching up, as though the years he spent hidden in Midian were now rising from the shadows of memory, meeting him on the road. Then came the moment he saw Aaron approaching from a distance, the brother he left behind, the brother who never stopped living under the pressure of Pharaoh's rule. Aaron's pace quickened when he recognized Moses. Their embrace carried both relief and unspoken fear. Two men who knew what Egypt was and what it demanded. Aaron listened as Moses described what happened at the bush. The light, the voice, the commission, and the message they were expected to deliver. Aaron's expression shifted. This was no small assignment. Yet he accepted it without stepping back. The two walked together for a long time, speaking in low tones about what awaited them. The court, the officials, the people who might resist them, and the ruler who once sought Moses' life. Through all of this, Moses carried a question deep within. Was he truly ready? The desert had shaped him, softened his pride, emptied the noise of his youth, but it had also made him aware of his limits. He knew his fears. He knew his past. He knew the weight of stepping into something larger than any one person. And still, he moved forward. That movement, hesitant at times, steady at others, was the beginning of his transformation. Destiny was not waiting at the finish line. It was forming inside him with each moment of obedience, each step toward a land he once ran from. A soft insight rises from this stage of his journey. Purpose rarely begins with confidence. Purpose begins with a quiet yes, a willingness to walk even when every emotion argues against it. Moses learned that God shapes a leader long before the leader understands the assignment. And in those ordinary years, the silence, the routine, the unnoticed days, the strength he would need was being built grain by grain. Fear was present, but fear wasn't the barrier. Disobedience would have been. And Moses, in all his uncertainty, kept walking. As the journey settles into its rhythm, the deeper message of Moses' story begins to emerge. It doesn't shout. It unfolds, almost like the desert at dawn, where the light grows a little at a time, revealing what was always there. We see a man who didn't walk into his purpose with bold declarations. He entered it through trembling steps. We see someone who questioned himself, questioned his ability, questioned whether he could return to a place marked by failure. And yet, it was precisely in those questions that God met him. Moses' story teaches us something profound. God is not distant from human hesitation. He speaks inside it. He prepares long before he reveals. Those years in Midian, forgotten by most, were the foundation of everything that was to come. Destiny doesn't always appear in moments of triumph. Sometimes it emerges when someone stands at the edge of reluctance and chooses obedience even when certainty is nowhere in sight. And then there is that easily overlooked moment recorded in Exodus, the moment when God confronted Moses on the journey. A moment many readers hurry past, yet it carries a message for anyone who walks with purpose. Sometimes the breakthrough God promises requires a surrender we didn't anticipate. Sometimes he touches the places we ignore because they matter more than we realize. Moses could not lead a nation in a covenant while holding back a part of that covenant in his own family. It was a quiet but essential realignment, a reminder that leadership begins in the areas no one sees. This principle reaches across time. When God calls someone, he also shapes them. He strengthens the inner life before the outer mission unfolds. And he addresses the hidden spaces because they determine how far someone can go. 57:00, 60:00, soft landing plus CTA, documentary tone, smooth, deep. Narrator's voice only. As we leave Moses on the road toward Egypt, the road that would change nations, challenge empires, and shape centuries, we're left with questions that echo into our own world. Have you ever felt a calling rise inside you while fear whispered its own arguments? Have you ever watched a door open but hesitated at its threshold? Have you ever sensed that something in your life needed realignment before you could step into what was next? Moses' journey speaks to all of this. His hesitation, his hidden struggles, his long years in silence, his unexpected encounters, his courage that grew step by step. All of it tells a story not just of a leader, but of a human being learning to trust the one who called him. Before we close, I'd love to know, which part of Moses' journey spoke to you the most? Have you ever felt like Moses, called, yet unsure? And which biblical character would you like us to explore next?